Tonight we are honored to welcome Mrs. Sue Bennett Grimes, a respected lifelong Lee County resident whose legacy of service, education, and community involvement has made a lasting impact on Southwest Florida. Mrs. Grimes comes from a family deeply rooted in the history of our community. Her mother, Mrs. Sue Spear Bennett, was born in a home just a short walk from here, across from what is now the Collaboratory, where her grandfather, Charles Spear, worked for the railroad. Today, Bennett Hart Park stands in honor of her family and the enduring legacy they have here in Lee County. She was the queen of the Edison Pageant of Light in 1955, just a few short years ago, and has remained a part of that organization as well as her family for generations. Fun fact, she and her mother were both Fort Myers High School Green Wave cheerleaders. I did my homework. I did. Can you imagine the stories the two of them must have shared from that experience? A longtime educator, Mrs. Grimes faithfully served generations of students in this county at Edison Park Elementary, Orangewood Elementary, and Tice Elementary. So thank you for that. Through her dedication to education, family, and civic service, she has quite literally helped shape and strengthen our community in countless ways. Please join me in welcoming Mrs. Sue Bennett Grimes. I'm going to stand over here so I'm not in front of her. Mrs. Mary Lee Mann, tonight we are honored to welcome longtime Lee County resident Mrs. Mary Lee Mann as one of our distinguished speakers for this special evening. Mrs. Mann, alongside her husband, the late Commissioner Frank Mann, are well known throughout our community for their dedication to family, faith, and service, as well as their deep roots in the history and heritage of Lee County. Through the years, she has remained a strong supporter of people, traditions, and organizations that make Lee County so special. We would be here quite a while if I listed all the accomplishments and the contributions of the Mann family and all they have brought to Lee County, but I would especially like to recognize their dedication to honoring the arts in our community. Yay. The hall, when I sit at her table, she always calls it the hall that so many of us have loved for so many years, proudly bears their family name and stands as a lasting symbol of that commitment. Mrs. Mann continues that legacy of service today as president of the Fort Myers Community Concerts, vice chair of the Florida Southwestern State College Foundation, parliamentarian of the Florida Gulf Coast University Town and Gown. I also want to mention quickly her and her husband's dedication to an organization in this town called LARC. It's absolutely extremely meaningful, and I've had the privilege of attending events where she was honored for their work there, and that's a proud accomplishment. She is also involved in several other nonprofit organizations whose mission is simply to strengthen and benefit our community. She is a recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award for the Women of Distinction in 2025. Her lifelong commitment to preserving local history, supporting the arts, and encouraging community connection has made a meaningful impact on generations of Lee County residents. And we are grateful for her continued leadership and for the example she sets through kindness, generosity, and genuine love for her community. Please join me in welcoming my dear friend, Mrs. Mary Lee Mann. So this is how this works. Each of them have prepared some comments. I'm going to let Mrs. Sue go first.
Oh,
and we'll get started, and then we'll let Mrs. Mann And since this is a family atmosphere, if you guys if they're telling a story and you want some clarification, I think it's perfectly okay if you just say, and what happened then if we don't get the whole story. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But no kidding. This is among friends, and I'm so excited to be here and hear these stories. But genuinely, if you wanna just talk to them. That's what this is about. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Well, thank all of you for having me here. It is such a privilege. And first of all, I want to introduce my daughter and my son, Susie Bell and Carl Grimes. And so many, many dear friends, and I really appreciate that you're here. And as you all know, we've gone through some rough times, but we're doing a whole lot better. Thanks to that. Fort Myers has always been in my heart, and I guess as long as I'm here, it will be. I don't want to be anyplace else but Fort Myers. And I guess I have to take it back a little bit to kind of bring things together. My mother was born here in 1911. And I want to add that she was, of course, born at home. The doctor came to the house, and the doctor was Stacy Brown's great-great-grandfather, Dr. Winkler.
That's great.
And all of these years, which it has been a while, Mother was born in 1911, there's been a very strong bond between the family. I love Stacy. I loved her mother, her grandmother, her great-grandmother was Miss Effie. And many of you may not have heard of Miss Effie. If you haven't, I could give you a long story about Miss Effie, but I won't. But Miss Effie doesn't always receive the credit that I think she was more than due, because she's the one initially started music in the public school. And that's very little is known about that. And my mother was a student of Miss Effie's, and Miss Effie had a place in one of those high schools, and when she had any time, she'd motion to my mother to come for a lesson. And Miss Effie was always dear to all of us. And I'll get back to something, but anyway, my mother was born here and she went to high school here and she loved it. I went to high school at Fort Myers High School, and my children went to Fort Myers High School. My father moved to Fort Myers in 1930. And when he moved here, he worked right across the street. He came here as an assistant manager of Crest Dime Store, and the building's still there. Well, of course, the company went out of business. But when he came here, it was back, of course, during the Depression. There was very little money to be had by anyone, but everyone was, as I understand, basically in the same fix. You did what you could do. Well, my mother found out, as she said, there's a new man in town. And first she said, you know, there's a new man in town. I like the way he looks. He's got a good job, and he's for me. And he ended up He did. Now his story to it was a little bit different. Mother lived most of her time with her grandmother because her mother passed away when my mother was only 12 or 13 years old, so she lived with her grandfather, and her father was on the railroad. He was an engineer on the railroad. So my father used to say, every day I'd look at the back door and in would come your mother with her poor little old grandmother, and they'd act as if they had to get either a needle or some thread so they could sew. And he said, I knew why they were coming in. They only had one reason, and I had to wait on them every time they came in the store. But they did marry at the First Methodist Church, and of course Miss Effie was there when they got married.
Did she have to approve that?
Oh, absolutely. Mother, anytime she had a boyfriend or was going out on any date or anything, she had to take that young man over to Miss Effie's, and if she did not approve, that was the end of that young man. But she approved of my father, so it moved forward from then. So I don't know where we need to go from there.
To Mary Lee and let her go.
Well, no, tell about high school with Barbara B. and your mother in high school. Their
Oh,
trip
yeah.
to Miami.
Well, I can talk about that, but
That's an okay story.
well, I think it's really wonderful when you think about it. You can be in Fort Myers and have lifelong friends, which is a privilege, truly a privilege. Mary Lee and I, even though we didn't grow up exactly together, our mothers graduated, her mother-in-law, Barbara B., and my mother graduated from Fort Myers High School in the same class in 1929. And Thomas Edison presented them their diplomas. He did not give the address, but Mrs. Edison did. And of course, you know, as my daughter says, I keep everything. And I do have a copy of that was in the paper when Edison was going to present the diplomas. And a wonderful thing about many of the graduates in that class stayed on in Fort Myers and made it what it is today. Wonderful, wonderful people. But as Mary Lee alluded to the fact, their trip to Miami when they were juniors in high school. And I'm sure both of them must have been in charge because Barbara sang and played the piano and Mother sang, and they did a lot of things together, and Barbara B. also studied with Miss Effie. So Mother would always look at magazines and see what was the latest thing, because she could sew and she could do all kinds of things. So they were in charge of the decorating for the junior-senior prom. And Mother said, well, I've got an idea of what we need to do. They've got a store over in Miami that sells everything you need for decorations. They were going to go. So here there were 4 girls. Now they were 17 years old. The Tamiami Trail had just opened. They decided they were going to go. Now that was really quite an adventure, because they had to stop as the alligators walked across the highway, and they'd see Indians all along the way. But that didn't bother them one bit. They were going to take a trip. And Mother used to say to me, and that was the best decorated place that we'd ever seen. And I'm sure she thought so too. I can let Mary Lee talk.
Oh, you sure?
Yes.
Well, I'm a relative newcomer compared to Miss Sue over here, because my family didn't come to Fort Myers until the 1950s, when my father brought his shrimp boats from the East Coast here. And at that time, believe it or not, the waterfront, the riverfront was still a working riverfront. David Ireland had his Gulf oil dock down there, close to where we are. There was the docks went from Monroe Street out into the river, and one of the docks was Tom Smoot's South Fish Company. Now, not the little Tommy Smoot that grew up with my boys or his father, but the Tom Smoot had South Fish Company, where local commercial fishermen brought in their fish catch. Well, my father needed some place to dock his shrimp boats, so he met with Tom Smoot, one of the first people we met when we moved over here, and he had his shrimp boats right down here at the end of Monroe Street for a while, until they realized that from downtown Fort Myers to Fort Myers Beach added several hours worth of not only time but fuel to the shrimp boat trip. So that's when they moved them out to Fort Myers Beach. But we lived in town. My family moved here in 1952, and that's when at Edison Park Elementary School I met Franklin Mann. We were in Miss Pope's 6th grade together. Although he wasn't there the first few days. There was an empty desk next to me the first week. Well, who's supposed to be there? Where is he? He had mononucleosis. Now, I don't know how an 11-year-old gets mononucleosis, but Frank Mann did. So when he finally came, I did get to meet him. And we were in Miss Crocker's junior department Sunday school class at First Presbyterian Church together. We were at Westminster Fellowship at First Presbyterian Church together. And after we left Edison Park, we went to the new junior senior high school on Cortez Boulevard. It was a big deal because it was a brand new building. In fact, the school was the biggest school in the area. It was so big that it was hard to find teams to compete. Like the junior varsity from Fort Myers High played Naples High School. We were so much bigger, and they were so teeny. I mean, they were just at the corner where you turn to go to Miami. Manatee High was one of the big football rivals when we were in elementary and high school. And one year we even played Dade City all the way up there, and the school system got a train to take us. And the football team, the cheerleaders, I was a cheerleader, and the band, all the kids who wanted to rode the train up to Dade City. It was like something out of a 1930s movie. It was just great, great fun. Those were the years that when you weren't brave enough to drive the trail to Miami, like their girls did. Any shopping that you did was down here on First Street. Miss Flossie's was on the corner. Sears and Penny's were across the street from each other. And the Boulevard Plaza, of course, that was years later, coming on down much, much later. And then there was nothing out Cleveland Avenue, except it used to be able to say where Kmart was, but now what's that, Floor and More or something? Yeah. That was a drive-in movie theater. Now, I'm not going to tell you how Franklin and I knew that it was a drive-in movie theater. We were in high school, remember? And across Winkler Avenue, which is Stacy's great-grandfather's, Dr. Winkler, that was George Sanders' Strawberry Fields. And now it's the Edison Mall. But everything was still going on downtown. That was the other end of the world. My family, of course, drove to Fort Myers Beach a lot because my oldest sister, who was married, her husband was in the business with my father, and of course our shrimp fleet was there at St. George Packing Company. That's right next to Erickson Jensen, the only one surviving. But we would go down to Fort Myers Beach frequently. From downtown, not very far out McGregor, most of that was all agricultural land. Names was chrysanthemums or mum fields. Yep, you remember that? Remember that there also used to be potato fields, and you knew the price was bad because you could smell the rotten potatoes that they couldn't afford to dig up because the price was so low. That was not a pleasant trip to the Fort Myers Beach then when you had to drive by the rotten potatoes. More pleasant were the gladiolus fields. You got A&W, Bulb, Glad Grove. Whoops, what did I do? Okay. Gladiolus Drive, Schultz Drive, all of those were Glad growers, and they had their Glad fields there. And you really didn't get to see, like they show fields of tulips in Holland. You didn't get that with Glads because they wanted to ship them before they opened. So they really harvested the fields when the flowers were just about to open, but not quite. And those that were open, they would sell very cheaply, and kids used to buy them. Lots of people bought them, and you could buy Glads on every street corner, and everybody had a gladiolus vase that you could put the Glads in because they were so common around here. They were shipped out of the railroad station where her father was working. That's how they shipped Glads from here for years and years from the railroad. That was a major part of the rail business, shipping the gladiolus. Well, when the shrimp fleet left from downtown Fort Myers to go to Fort Myers Beach, that was a major impact on Fort Myers Beach. And one place in particular, because the boats were on San Carlos Island, east of the bridge that connects San Carlos Island to Fort Myers Beach, Estero Island. And does anybody remember how they opened the bridge? A little man got out, walked out, put the handle in the hole in the middle, and walked around and hand cranked the bridge. Which was not real bad when you just had a few cars going across and maybe one or two boats. But when you moved several dozen up to almost 100 shrimp boats wanting to get through the bridge, it became a major problem. They eventually did mechanize it, but it was still a swing bridge until now the new Sky Bridge, which was years in the making before it came. So if you think the traffic is bad on Fort Myers Beach now, just imagine when you didn't know when the boats were going to go, but when they wanted to go, they had to open the bridge and the cars just backed up. And there was no bridge on the south end either at that point. That was years later too. So that was a major impact. Now I have to tell you that the workers on the shrimp boats did not have the best reputations. These were people who all of a sudden were making more money than they could imagine in their lifetimes. They'd been, a lot of them, just commercial fishermen, and now they were bringing in huge amounts of money. So they didn't always behave. I'm not real sure how it worked, but I know that my father had something like a credit account with the sheriff's office or the bail bondsman. And I remember Friday and Saturday nights, the phone would ring late at night. This is Captain John. My father had run his own boats early on. This is Captain John. Okay, this is the sheriff's department or the bail bondsman. We've got so-and-so down here in jail, drunk and disorderly, whatever. Does he work on one of your boats? Yeah, he's on one of my boats, so we'll pay him, you can let him go. Of course, they took it out of the next pay when he came back. But these were men who were at sea for like 40 days. This was when they were shrimping off the Bay of Campeche, off of Mexico. And they staggered the boats so that one would be going out with ice and another one would be coming back, bringing the shrimp. But the men themselves were staying over there with the boats for 40 days. So when they got to shore, they were ready to be on shore. Except for a few of them who figured out that there were some enterprising Mexicans who, because they couldn't go from the boats into Mexico, that was another country. But somebody figured out that small boats from Mexico could come out to the shrimp fleet and maybe exchange tequila or whatever else they found interesting. And I think most of the time they paid for it with the shrimp that really belonged to the owner of the boat. So when you found out that this was going on, you kind of tried to get rid of those people. That wasn't the greatest thing in the world. While Franklin and I were in high school, one of the places besides Fort Myers Beach, and there was always somebody who was going to water ski around Estero Island. I don't think anybody ever did that, did they? No, somebody was always going to try, but we used to actually water ski in the back bay, if you can believe it, with all the boats that are there, even as late as, y'all remember that too. But when we weren't going to Fort Myers Beach, Franklin and I went to North Fort Myers. We went out Pondella Road, turned onto Harney Point Road, which was a dirt road then. And the reason we were going down Harney Point Road was because Franklin's father had decided that all of his friends, Unc Starnes of Henderson, Franklin, Starnes, and Holt, had cattle down at Corkscrew. Gerald Moody, his friend from church, had cattle somewhere out in North Fort Myers. Several of the other guys that he was around all the time, they had cattle, so George Mann was going to have cattle. So he bought a section of land on Harney Point Road and started his cattle herd. Well, they started with two, one named Priscilla. That was for Franklin's brother, no, Patricia. That was for Franklin's brother, Pat. And Francis for Franklin. So they had the two, Patricia and Francis. And we would go over and ride on the two horses. I mean, this was an elaborate outfit. The two horses were pokey in paint and ring the bell, and the cows would come up and we'd feed them because there wasn't enough grass really for them to survive. But that was great fun to do in the late 50s off of Harney Point Road. And you know where we were doing that? Right now, that's where the Cape Coral City Hall is.
I knew that. That's great.
But still, most everything that was happening in our area happened downtown. Fort Myers was the hub of everything, kind of like what it's turned back into today.
That's right.
Fort Myers again. There was a band shell where we had the singing Christmas tree. You sang on the singing Christmas tree, I bet, didn't you, Sue?
About 4 times.
Yes, she said about 4 times. This was a structure shaped like a Christmas tree, and Fort Myers High School's chorus were the singers, and it was a big deal to get to be the top girl on the singing Christmas tree. Yeah, you had to be a senior, and I was never in chorus. But the ones who were, they talk about it all year, like who's going to get to be the top girl on singing Christmas tree. And the Fort Myers High School band played. Everybody came out. It was a big civic event that you came down, and the band shell was kind of behind us here toward the river. That was a big event for the holiday season. That was right next to where the exhibition hall was. Y'all remember the exhibition hall? Hadn't been torn down that long, but it was built in the 50s, and if anything was going to happen, it was going to happen at the exhibition hall. Elvis Presley sang there early on in his career. Now, I didn't sing, and there were always people in school who swore that they had been there. I didn't believe half of them, but I understand Elvis really did sing there. Political things happened there too. President Gerald Ford visited Fort Myers, and he made a speech at the exhibition hall.
Wow.
Years later, when Franklin was in the legislature and I was president of the Audubon Society, we were working with Jimmy Buffett, was working with his Save the Manatees, and he and Bob Graham came to town to release a manatee down on our riverfront here. And Franklin helped. He's in the water and they're releasing the manatee, and then everybody goes back to the exhibition hall so that everybody can talk. And our two sons, Frank Jr. and Ian, came down with us. Well, news press photographer or reporter was there, and of course those two boys were the only ones under the age of deceased who were in the place. So he wanted to talk to them and went up to them and said, "Oh, did you come down to meet the governor?" And my two boys in high school, who had spent several years going to Tallahassee, being around the legislature, being around a lot of politicians, looked at the reporter and said, "We met Governor Graham. We came to meet Jimmy Buffett." That's probably a good place for me to sign off as, because it gets too recent after that. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
I'm gonna ask her to tell one more story that I've heard at her kitchen table. I've had the distinct pleasure. It means a lot to me because I didn't know this. She told me one day. What is a church story? I love church stories. So many of our good stories happen from church. How come? Oh, okay. Yeah. She's like, I know she's sitting here thinking, what did I say? What did I say? I promise you, it's a good one.
Okay. Franklin went from Lee Memorial Hospital Nursery to First Presbyterian Church Nursery, so he was there all of his life. And Sam Galloway Jr. was just about the same, but he was a couple of years younger. But we all kind of, and then when I came in the elementary school, we all kind of grew up together at First Presbyterian Church. Sam was also a very devoted member of the church, and he attended adult Sunday school class for as many years as I can remember. And one of those adult Sunday school classes that he was part of, he started talking to them about, do you know how many people in our area are hungry? They don't have food, they don't know where the next meal is going to come from. Why aren't we doing something about that? So at the time, I think I was Sunday school superintendent or something. I was doing something. Anyway, I knew what the Sunday school class was doing, so they decided that they wanted to do something. They decided that we could feed some of these people. So we came down to the church kitchen, made peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I put them in the trunk of my car and drove out to what was then Anderson Avenue, pulled behind one of the buildings under one of the shade trees where men were gathered, opened my trunk and said, "Would you like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich?" And that was the beginning of the soup kitchen, now the community cooperative ministry.
I think that's one of my favorite stories, and we can go on and on. Oh my goodness, I've got her blocked in here. We can go on and on telling those stories.
What that reminds you of, Sue?
That's all right, but you know, you sit here and you can't help but think about other things that come to mind. And I did want to talk to you just a little bit, because I know everybody's getting a little anxious about leaving. But this is what a lot went on here in Fort Myers during World War II. A lot of people are not aware of the fact that we had two big stations here, Army base. We had Buckingham and Page Field. Now, the impact on Fort Myers, like many cities and towns throughout the United States, were very affected, of course, by the war. And during this period of time, my father and an uncle decided they would open a chicken place. Now that's all the name there was. Chicken place. That was just good enough.
Right there.
And the building where they had this chicken place is still standing, but of course it has been remodeled since the 40s. But it was only open on weekends, Friday and Saturday, because on the weekends there would be busloads of soldiers that had a weekend pass. So as soon as they got off of the bus, they ran to the chicken place, because for 50 cents you could get a quarter of fried chicken, French fries, a roll, and a cold drink. So needless to think, that's where they would go. And I remember seeing lines of soldiers around the block waiting to get their 50-cent chicken dinner. And from there, I'm not real sure where they went, but I don't think they came back for more chicken.
Why don't you share with them how you walked home?
Oh, they don't want to hear that.
Oh, yes,
The building is over. Well, it was on Main Street, and it was an open store area, and it was only closed down with Bahama shutters. So, of course, everybody in the family, you'd have to go down there and spend a little time. And there were just picnic benches, that's where everyone ate. And I was sitting there, and I told my mother, I said, I'm ready to go home. She said, well, we're not going home yet. And after a little bit, I said again, I'm ready to go home. Well, you're not going home now. We have things here we have to do. She was a very sweet, gentle person. She didn't say much. So I decided, well, I know my way home. I'll just walk home. Now, this was the middle of the war, and you don't go anywhere by yourself. So I started walking, and I got down past what was the Ford agency at that time. It was on the corner of Monroe Street, and I got a pretty good long distance, and about that time, here comes a car speeding up, and that's my mother. And she said, get in the car. What are you doing? I said, I'm just going home. I wanted to go home. She said, I told you you were not going home, and we're going right back to the chicken place. And that's where we went.
How about
But-
looking over the balcony while they're dancing?
But,
Oh, I don't.
oh, there wasn't something you'd want me to say. But anyway,
Didn't they have dances and you used to watch people dancing, the soldiers?
what, honey?
At the hotel, did you watch them dancing?
Dancing
Or somewhere?
and
Did you
were
watch
watching
dancing?
them people dance? The soldiers dance and you guys were peeking over the balcony to watch?
No, I don't think so, but I would have watched if I had been there, I think, or tried to dance myself. But I did want to share with you something that I remember. I guess I could be here and keep you all night on things I do remember. And I guess maybe some things need to be written down because I'm not as young as I used to be and I don't want to forget anything. But the Methodist Church, those of you that have been in the community a while know, the First Methodist Church was torn down. It was on the corner of First and Royal Palm. And for a long time, I wouldn't go down that street. I wouldn't have my daughter go down the street because we were heartbroken. about the church, which was the oldest church, the oldest property of a church in the Colusa region was the First Methodist Church on the corner. Well, anyway, we were misled completely by the conference and different ones that wanted the property. Nothing ever reverted back to members. They had no say-so. Well, we had a say-so, but that didn't mean anything. So they sold it for $9 million. But when I was a child, a while ago, across the street from the First Methodist Church was the beautiful Royal Palm Hotel. And I did bring some pictures, but you may not be interested, but it is interesting.
Wow.
It was truly a luxury hotel. And during World War II, the officers and their wives would stay at this hotel. And I was reading about it, and it was built in 1879, I believe is when they opened the Royal Palm Hotel. And it was really a luxury hotel. The local people, that was not where they dined. Not at the Royal Palm Hotel. It's very elegant, as I've been told, but we used to just really marvel because something of that stature had been built in Fort Myers. And I have understood that really the first Royal Palms in this area were ones that the one that did the landscaping at the Royal Palm Hotel used Royal Palms. That's where Thomas Edison got his idea about planting Royal Palms on McGregor Boulevard because, and Mother used to say to me, she said, there's one Royal Palm still standing on the property where there was a Royal Palm Hotel. Now I'm sure that tree's no longer there, but Mother felt like most trees were sacred anyway, and you didn't tear them down, you didn't. But so many have been torn out.
Oh, you mean the one who threatened to chain herself to the tree?
Yeah, that's what I.
But,
This would be the same woman who threatened to chain herself to the
oh
tree?
yeah, she did do that, but she didn't have to do that because Mother, as I said, trees were very important to her, and she and my father used to go up and down McGregor Boulevard, and they would count the trees, count the Royal Palms, and then she would let the city know they needed to replace so many trees. And at that time there was no sprinkling system, there was nothing set aside to fertilize these trees, and Mother started the Save the Palms, and they are now fertilized, and they are now for the sprinkler system. So, I don't think there was anything else that I needed to share. But again, thank you so much.
There's a question.
I'm sorry, I missed where the actual place of the Royal Palm Hotel was.
The Royal Palm Hotel. Well, down First Street.
At the Burroughs? Yes.
No.
Across the street from the borough.
Well,
Just
just a minute and I'll tell you exactly where it is. Because it's on First Street, and how they extended Bay Street to come back around. In that section is where the Royal Palm Hotel sat. There was no bridge at Fowler, but Fowler there was a pier that came up to the edge, and that's where they built the Royal Palm Hotel. Now, where the Royal Palm Hotel was built, originally on that property, one of the founders of Lee County was F.A. Hendry, and their home sat on that property. And a Mr. Hugh O'Neill from Ireland came to this area, and he purchased that property. He paid $7,000 to buy the Hendry home on the river, which I'm sure at that time must have been a couple of acres. And then a lot was dredged in. But that's where it started. And as I said, officers in World War II came there a lot, and I think I went to lunch there once. And I thank you.
I had a question. Where was the Englehart funeral home?
At 5 Points, where the new hotel is now.
Ask the question so they
Where
can hear it.
she asked where the Englehart Funeral Home was. The building itself is across McGregor on the other side of the street, and it was just moved across the street. That was 5 Points, no overpass. Those were all the streets came together. The fountain that's in front of Fort Myers Country Club was in the middle there at 5 Points. Before my time, it was a horse watering trough. But that's where the Englehart Funeral Home was, in that point that now just has the brand new hotel. Jeannie Dozier has been bugging me ever since she found out about this event, wanting to know what salacious stories I was going to share.
Here's your champagne.
They said you were gonna spill the tea.
Yeah, spill the tea. They kept threatening to ply me with champagne. Well, I've figured out I can tell one story that if you were around, you're gonna know what it was, and if you're not, too bad. Because I'm not gonna name names, but this will give you something to talk about.
I know. That's right.
Yeah. A well-known elected official of the city of Fort Myers had a very attractive wife who found a very attractive businessman that they decided they would get together, and they did that frequently. Finally, the elected official found out about it, caught them, I guess you could say in flagrante, and shot the businessman
Stop it.
in the gluteus maximus, which was not life-threatening but needed medical attention. The businessman, because Fort Myers was still very small at that time, was not going to go to Lee Memorial Hospital. So he got a friend to drive him to Sarasota, to their hospital, thinking this takes care of everything. Well, guess what? A woman from Fort Myers was having some procedure that she didn't want everybody else to know about. And so she went to the Sarasota hospital and she saw him, and then the story came back to Fort Myers.
Now I'm gonna Google person shot in the butt.
She'll never tell.
Or governor doing his work days, he would get publicity wherever he would go. And Franklin said, I don't have a big money base in Lee County. I've got to come up with a hook to get people to think about me. And the press started referring to him as the dark horse candidate because they didn't think he had a chance. So he said, well, if I'm gonna be the dark horse candidate, I'm really gonna be the dark horse candidate. And he rode a horse, literally, a Tennessee Walker, from the Lee County Civic Center all the way to Tallahassee. Now, not in one fell swoop, but he rode all the way. He had a campaign manager who went ahead and made arrangements for places where he could stay. He stayed in people's homes and in state parks, and we didn't do on the interstate, which had gotten built by that time. It was on the back roads, but he literally rode all the way. And when he'd go to a town, he'd get a media person or an elected official would ride on the second horse with him, so that got more publicity too. So he got a lot of publicity, and he was great at it, and he would stop wherever he was and be very entertaining, as he always was. But and there is a picture in the Senate office building in Tallahassee now. He's on his horse. The horse is headed to the Capitol. The Capitol is up there, and he's turned around looking at the photographer, yes, so you get to see his face and the Capitol, and that's hanging in the state Senate office building still.